She was stolen from her wedding, not by the man she was about to marry, but by the one her father had swindled out of $10 million, Raphael Mancini. He was a mafia boss, one of the most feared men in New York City. He simply walked into her bridal suite, zipped the back of her gown, hoisted her onto his shoulder, and informed her that she was now his. She knew she was supposed to despise him. She knew she should have fled. Instead, she found herself falling
Raphael.
for him, and he for her.
Just stay right behind me. We're getting out of here.
When he actually got down on his knee and asked her to be his wife for real, she said no. The doubt lingered. Did he truly want her? Or was he after her father's stolen fortune? So she gave him everything. The account, the flash drive, the unvarnished truth, and walked out of his life. That was 3 months in the past. Since then, not a single call, not one text message. He hadn't come looking for her. The very man who had stalked her every move for 2 years just let her disappear. Now, Angela Fury is on the brink of doing the most foolish thing she has ever attempted. She's returning to New York, returning to him. But at this very moment, she's still in Charleston, crying herself to sleep for the 89th night running. For those initial weeks, Angela's tears were relentless. She would wake up reaching for a man who wasn't there, breathing in for the scent of cedar and danger, only to find the stale air of her apartment in Charleston. Miranda was her rock through the worst of it, seeing her through late nights filled with cheap wine and terrible films, and early mornings with coffee when Angela's eyes were too puffy to face the world on her own. This evening, they were perched cross-legged on Miranda's bed, a half-eaten pizza box resting between them. "I just don't understand," Miranda said, placing her slice down to study Angela's expression. "You told me you were happy. You swore you were in love. So why did you leave him? Why turn down his proposal?" A knot formed in Angela's chest. She began picking at a stray thread on the comforter, unable to meet her friend's eyes. "I thought he loved me," she confessed in a low voice. "But that money was always a shadow between us. It was the entire reason he tracked me down to begin with." Her voice wavered. "I couldn't say yes to marrying him without being certain that his feelings were genuine, and not just a scheme to eventually claim that account." She scrubbed at her eyes with the back of her hand. "And see where that got me? I handed it all over. The drive, the account details, every last bit." A bitter edge sharpened her tone. 3 months, Miranda. The man who obsessively watched me for years. He hasn't called, hasn't sent a message, absolutely nothing. Miranda's gaze narrowed. She leaned in closer, her expression intense. "Okay, but you're overlooking a key detail, babe." Angela glanced up. "He can't get to that money without you. The account is in your name." Miranda cocked her head. "And in 3 months, he hasn't made a single move to access it. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" The question felt like a splash of icy water. Angela stared. "That's right. Maybe he left the money for you?" Miranda pressed on. "Maybe he's just waiting for you to come back to him by choice. Not out of obligation, but because you actually want to be there." Angela chewed on her lower lip. A flicker of hope, both delicate and terrifying, began to push through the dread that had taken root in her heart. "You honestly believe that?" Miranda gestured wildly with her hands. "How should I know? But we're not going to get any answers just sitting around here." She paused, a cunning smile playing on her lips. "By the way, have you noticed anything strange?" "What?" 3 months, and suddenly every bakery in Charleston is trying to recruit you. We're talking high-end establishments that wouldn't have given you a second glance before. Miranda lifted an eyebrow. "What's your explanation for that?" Angela sank back against the headboard. "It's because I'm skilled at my craft." "You're a prodigy," Miranda conceded. "But for every single one of them to discover you at the same time? That isn't just good fortune, Angela. That's someone pulling strings. A warmth bloomed in her chest, a feeling she tried to suppress. Speaking of, Miranda's grin grew mischievous. Have you been keeping tabs on him? What's Raphael been up to? Angela let out a laugh. It sounded foreign, but it was genuine. Do you really think a man like that has an Instagram account? He's not exactly the type to be posting selfies, Miranda. No one can get near the guy. Miranda snatched a sweatshirt from her pillow and tossed it at Angela's head. No one but you idiot. She bounced on the bed, suddenly buzzing with excitement. Look, it's almost Christmas. Let's just take a quick trip to New York for the holidays. Angela's heart skipped a beat. You'd go with me? Are you serious? Miranda was already grabbing her phone. I've been itching to see the city. Plus, you have to settle this once and for all. Find out if your mob boss boyfriend still wants you, or if I need to go put a key to his car. A small smile played on Angela's lips, fighting the nervous energy coursing through her. All right, she whispered. Let's do it. Almost 1,000 miles from there, Raphael Mancini was seated in a private dining area of one of Manhattan's most upscale restaurants. Seated opposite him was Melissa Simone, swirling the champagne in her glass. She was a vision of blonde hair and scarlet lipstick, the type of woman acutely aware of her own stunning beauty. Mr. Mancini, she said, lifting her glass with a slow, purposeful smile. I am certain this new venture will be lucrative for us both. Thank you for agreeing to my invitation. Her high heel grazed his ankle beneath the table. From now on, we'll be collaborating very closely. Her voice lowered to an intimate whisper. I think it's time we got to know one another on a deeper level. To break the ice a little. Raphael wasn't paying attention. His gaze had drifted to a table by the window, where a young woman with dark hair tied back in a ponytail sat in athletic wear, her back to him. In his imagination she turned, and her face was Angela's. He let out a slow breath, the familiar ache in his chest feeling as sharp as ever. Mr. Mancini. He blinked, snapping back to the present. The partnership is secure, Melissa. His voice was devoid of emotion, strictly business. But I have other pressing concerns. In the future, you will coordinate with my staff. They will manage the daily operations. He rose to his feet, fastening the button on his jacket. Unless an emergency arises, there's no reason for us to meet in person again. He strode away without a backward glance. From behind, she flicked her hair over her shoulder and watched him depart. You believe you can resist me, don't you, handsome? She mused to herself with a smile. I always get exactly what I want. The week that came after was a chaotic whirlwind of packing, panicking, and questioning every single choice Angela had ever made. And then, before she could change her mind, she was 30,000 feet up, watching the clouds drift past her window. When the plane's wheels hit the runway at John F. Kennedy Airport, her heart was hammering so hard she felt she couldn't draw a breath. What in the world am I doing? The question echoed through her mind. She clenched the armrest as the aircraft made its way to the gate. Miranda gave her other hand a reassuring squeeze. Just breathe, girl. You can do this. But doubt kept whispering worst-case scenarios into her ear, each one more convincing than the last. Would he sweep her into his arms the second he saw her, kissing her and whispering, "You came home to me?" against her lips? Or had he moved on completely? Perhaps he'd already found a loophole to get the money without her. Perhaps he had no use for her anymore. Perhaps 3 months of total silence meant precisely what it seemed to mean. He's moved on. Angela swallowed nervously as the plane's doors slid open. There was only one way to know for sure. Their hotel room was unremarkable. It had clean bedding, a view of a brick wall, and a radiator that rattled every few minutes as if it were trying to send a message in Morse code. Angela was standing before the bathroom mirror, fiddling with her hair. The bangs were a recent change. She had marched into a salon 2 weeks after leaving Raphael, just like countless heartbroken women before her, and instructed the stylist to do something radical. Now she was tugging at them, trying to smooth them over her forehead, angling her head from one side to the other. Will he even see the difference? Will he like it? A flush of heat rose up her neck as the thought solidified. 3 months of dead silence, Angela. 3 months of absolutely nothing. And here you are, primping as if he's been waiting with a bouquet of roses and a love song. Her reflection gazed back, revealing flushed cheeks and worried eyes. She pursed her lips, suppressing the urge to laugh at her own foolishness. How pathetic! She spun away from the mirror before she could fall deeper into that spiral. The little cafe was situated right across the street from Raphael's restaurant, in the same building that held his office on the upper floors, the very same entrance she had used dozens of times when she had belonged to him. Angela clutched her cinnamon roll latte, absorbing the warmth into her hands. A December in Manhattan had a much sharper bite than Charleston ever did. The cafe's windows were glazed with condensation around the edges, with Christmas lights shimmering through the frost. Miranda burrowed deeper into her coat, her breath visible in the chilly air. The tip of her nose had turned a bright pink from the cold. Okay, run this by me one more time. She pointed at the restaurant across the way with a gloved hand. We flew 1,000 miles. His office is literally right over there. We could march in, knock on his door, and have our answers in 5 minutes flat. She gave an exaggerated shiver. But instead, we're out here freezing our butts off playing spies. What's the reason? Angela took a deliberate sip of her latte. The cinnamon flavor was sweet and comforting on her tongue. She had ordered it specifically because it brought back memories of the kitchen in Raphael's mansion. The scent of warm spices, the golden afternoon light, Oscar pleading for another treat. I just need to see him first, from afar. Miranda's eyes rolled so dramatically Angela thought they might get lost in her head. That's a lie. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're terrified. Which is absurd, you know. That man proposed to you on bended knee 3 months ago. She snorted. What do you think could have possibly changed? He picked up a new girlfriend in a day? The words were intended to be comforting, but they landed flat. Angela started to reply just as a flicker of motion from across the street snagged her attention. The door to the restaurant opened. Oscar emerged first, his imposing figure impossible to mistake, even from this distance. He surveyed the street with a trained, methodical gaze, another bodyguard at his side. 10:51. A harsh, rusty laugh tore from Angela's throat before she could swallow it. God, Oscar, she thought, shaking her head. I can't believe I actually missed that oversized teddy bear. Miranda's eyes narrowed. The bodyguard? He's massive. He's on a new health kick. It's a whole saga. Just then, the door swung open once more. Angela's breath hitched. Raphael. The rest of the world dissolved. The cafe's low hum, the distant city traffic. All of it gone. 11:21. Miranda's voice vanished. As he moved onto the sidewalk, time seemed to bend and slow around him. A couple of dark strands of hair had escaped, falling onto his forehead. A rare imperfection for a man who was always flawlessly put together. From clear across the street, his ice-blue eyes sliced through the bleak December atmosphere like chips of Arctic ice. A faint shadow of stubble dusted a jawline that looked as if it were carved from granite. 11:47. She saw then that he was tired, a deep weariness that settled in the shadows just beneath his eyes. His charcoal coat was impeccably tailored, stretching across shoulders that felt even broader than her memory served. And then, there was his walk. That unhurried, commanding gait of a predator who laid claim to every room he entered, every street he walked, and every soul who met his gaze. 12:11. A forbidden heat coiled low in her belly. A phantom pressure ghosted across her lips, a memory of his mouth claiming hers. She recalled the way his hands had framed her face, as if she were something priceless, something fragile, something that belonged to him. Even from this distance, she could almost conjure his scent, cedarwood and something more primal, the smell of danger, or perhaps desire. God, she whispered, the word a mere puff of air. 12:36. I've missed him so damn much. Miranda jabbed an elbow into her ribs. Your guy prowls around like he owns the world and just walked off a high-fashion runway. She let out a low whistle. A jawline like that ought to be criminal. The whole way he moves. Damn, Angela. Angela's knuckles whitened around her coffee cup as her own body began to betray her, already rising from the seat, compelled to cross that street. 1 o'clock. To do what? Launch herself into his arms? Beg for an explanation? Her pulse thundered against her ribs as she took a hesitant step toward the street. Then a second. Raphael was standing beside a black SUV, talking to Oscar, near enough that she could call his name, near enough to reach out and touch. The restaurant door opened a third time. A woman stepped out, a cascade of blonde hair falling over her shoulders. Her lips painted a slash of defiant red that burned even from across the pavement. 13:28. She moved with the confidence of a supermodel, defying the bitter cold in a mini skirt that showcased impossibly long legs in sheer stockings, her stilettos clicking sharply on the concrete. A brilliant smile stretched across her face as she closed the distance to Raphael, and then she laid a hand on his arm. The ground fell out from under Angela. Oh. Miranda's voice sounded like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. 13:51. Angela? Who is that? A painful pressure was building behind Angela's eyes while her throat closed around the words she couldn't form. The blonde woman leaned into Raphael's space, murmuring something that drew a laugh from him before she flicked her hair back. And Raphael pulled open the passenger door for her. She slid into the seat as if it were her throne. 14:14. Angela whirled around so abruptly she nearly sent her chair toppling over. She collapsed back into her seat, turning her back to the window, her hands trembling as she gripped her cup. But she couldn't resist one last glance over her shoulder. The SUV was merging into traffic, and it was taking every last shred of hope she had carried with her for 1,000 miles along with it. 14:32. Idiot. You are such an idiot. Miranda had been kidding about him moving on, but you really let yourself believe he would be waiting. Tears began to cloud her vision, hot and immediate. She blinked furiously, trying to force them down, but it was too late. A vast, aching void opened up inside her chest. 14:52. Miranda's hand covered hers across the table, squeezing gently. Hey, let's not assume the worst. We don't have all the facts. It could be anyone. A colleague, his cousin. But did you see how she touched him? Angela's voice fractured, the way she got into his car. A heavy silence fell between them. The first snowflakes of the season started to fall, soft, weightless flakes that landed on Angela's eyelashes and dissolved into nothing. 15:19. Just like her hope. Inside the SUV, Raphael gazed out the side window. Melissa's perfume had already colonized the vehicle's interior, a cloying floral scent so thick it felt like a weight on his chest. He lowered the window a fraction, welcoming the blade of cold air that cut through the oppressive sweetness. And I'm certain that if we were to reorganize our distribution networks, we'd see at least a 15% rise in... Raphael simply held up a hand. 15:42. Melissa stopped talking instantly. I have made myself clear before, he stated, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. Unless the matter is urgent, this is what my team handles. I do not have the time for day-to-day logistics. He finally turned his head, his face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. Inform Oscar of your destination. For a split second, Melissa's practiced smile wavered before she pasted it back on. 1609. She slid closer on the leather seat, placing her hand on his thigh. Do you want to know what I think? Her voice dropped into a low, breathy register she clearly intended to be alluring. I think you need to decompress. Get away from all of this business. Let someone who actually appreciates you buy you a drink. From the front seat, Oscar's gaze darted to the rearview mirror, his nose crinkling as if he smelled something foul. Mud, 1632. The man had absolutely no poker face when it came to any woman who wasn't Angela. Raphael lifted her hand from his leg, his movements slow and deliberate, as if handling a contaminated object. While that is a generous proposition, he said, his tone containing not an ounce of warmth, it is also an unnecessary one. I require our association to remain strictly business. Melissa's smile tightened at the edges. 1657. For just a heartbeat, the mask slipped, and a cold, calculating glint appeared in her eyes. It was the briefest flash of the ambition that hid beneath the charm. As the vehicle slowed to a halt, Melissa collected her purse, her smile now brittle and overly bright. Some other time, perhaps. She exited onto the sidewalk, then leaned back in. I've come up with some thrilling new concepts for our future ventures. 1720. I'm positive you'll be eager to hear them. Raphael met her gaze through the open window, his expression one of profound boredom. Happy holidays, Melissa. The door clicked shut and the SUV pulled away. Oscar didn't speak until they were around the block. Boss? He began, his voice thick with a strange energy. Raphael pinched the bridge of his nose. Oscar, I am bone-tired. 1746. No matter what it is, you'll want to hear this. The conviction in his bodyguard's voice made Raphael look up. A massive grin stretched across Oscar's face, showing all 32 teeth. Our contact at the Charleston airport sent word this morning. He was practically vibrating with excitement. Angela Fiore got on a plane to New York. She touched down about 2 hours ago. The entire world seemed to stop moving. Raphael's hand clamped down on his knee, his jaw locking. 1816. For 3 months, he had waited. For 3 months, he had watched her from afar, placing calls to bakeries across Charleston to ensure she found work. He had kept his distance because she had asked for it, because she had given him her everything before walking away. He needed her to choose him without coercion, without obligation. 3 months of iron-willed discipline, of brutal restraint. And she was here. 1838. She's here? The words were a rough, ragged sound, dangerously close to vulnerable. In this city, right now. A moment of charged silence passed, and then, slowly, like a crack appearing in a marble facade, the faintest hint of his signature smile touched Raphael's lips, the one that revealed a sliver of the man beneath the monster. Oscar was practically bouncing in the driver's seat, causing the SUV to swerve. 1904. Do you think she's at the penthouse? Maybe she came straight there, to surprise you. Raphael's smile widened, and a spark of warmth ignited deep within his icy eyes, a light that had been extinguished for months. The Angela I know wouldn't be so direct. He paused, his focus shifting to the window, where the snow had begun to fall in earnest, soft flakes dancing past the glass. 1927. But for once, let's hope I'm wrong. His voice became sharp steel. Back to work, back in command. Get everyone on the line. I want her location within the hour. Done, boss. Oscar was already on his phone. The car shot forward into the flow of traffic. Behind them, forgotten on the curb, Melissa offered a wave to the disappearing vehicle. No one saw her. 1950. Raphael was consumed by the sight of the season's first snow drifting down, silent and graceful, as if the entire city were holding its breath for him. She came back. My little dove came home. His fingers tapped a restless, impatient rhythm against his leg. For the first time in 3 long months, Raphael Mancini felt something other than a hollow ache. 2011. Angela's slice of pizza was a cold, greasy monument on her plate. Miranda leaned forward, her tone soft yet firm. Angela, come on. You can't immediately leap to the worst-case scenario. She began counting on her fingers. The man is gorgeous, loaded, powerful, and ridiculously sexy. Seeing Angela's death stare, she winced. 2032. Right. Sorry. But what I'm saying is, women are always going to be orbiting a man like that. It doesn't have to mean something. Angela remained mute. A knot of grief lodged in her throat. Miranda's approach changed. Okay. Fine. You know what? Let's be real. Any man with a woman that attractive nearby is going to think about it. It's primal instinct. She gave a helpless shrug. But screw him. I'm serious. 2056. She sat up straight, her voice filled with a sudden, determined energy. This is our first real vacation together. New Year's is just around the corner. We are in New York freaking city. A wide grin split her face. Yeah, we're broke. But who says we can't have a good time? Before Angela could even think of an objection, Miranda had her phone out and was dialing. Hey, Patrick, what's up? Her voice instantly became bright and playful. 2119. So listen, my friend and I are in town. What's the plan for tonight? Give me the details. Angela's eyes flew open. She started waving her hands in a panic, mouthing, No, no, no. Miranda paid her no attention whatsoever. Oh, your friends are coming out too? Even better. She shot Angela a conspiratorial wink. We'll see you then. She ended the call and grabbed Angela's forearm. Come on, we're leaving this sad pizza place to find somewhere we can actually cut loose. Come on, she said, pulling Angela to the door. We didn't fly 1,000 miles for you to cry over cold appetizers. This club was the polar opposite of the places Raphael took her. There were no velvet ropes, no exclusive tables, no hushed reverence when the owner walked by. It was just an assault of flashing lights, a pounding electronic beat, and a sea of bodies grinding on a sticky dance floor. The air was thick with the smell of cheap vodka and desperation. Angela wrinkled her nose. Miranda, what are we doing here? Girls just want to have fun, Angela. Miranda grabbed her shoulders. That is the mission tonight, understood? No crying, no sulking, just fun. Patrick and Tom were already waiting by the bar. Patrick was tall and sandy-haired, with a laid-back smile that she figured worked on most women. Miranda launched herself into his arms. Angela, this is Patrick. We went to college together. He's a total sweetheart. Patrick's attention fell on Angela, and his easy smile widened. Miranda, he said, shaking his head slowly. You never mentioned you had a friend this gorgeous. Angela managed a tight-lipped smile. Nice to meet you. She turned to the bartender before Patrick could say more. Tequila, straight up. The first shot burned all the way down. The second was less of a shock. By the third, the world's sharp edges had begun to blur. No one here to tell me how much tequila goes in my margarita. She raised the fourth glass. Here's to you, Raphael Mancini, you bastard. The tequila hit her tongue like a flash fire. You said you loved me. You said you wanted me. You said I'm yours forever. Then you couldn't wait to throw yourself at some blonde the second I was out of sight. A fifth shot. The room tilted sideways. Miranda had disappeared with Tom onto the dance floor, laughing without a care in the world. Angela gripped the bar to steady herself. A hand settled on her waist. Hey. Patrick's voice was warm and far too close to her ear. Want to dance? Angela batted his hand away. Look, you seem like a nice guy, but I hate men right now. All of them. So, back off. Patrick just chuckled, completely unbothered. Maybe you just haven't met the right one yet. A bitter laugh ripped out of her. The right one? She spun to face him, swaying on her feet. I met him, the realest man I've ever known. And you know what I learned? They're all the same. Every single one. Patrick stepped closer. Come on, don't put us all in the same box. His fingers brushed her bangs aside, tucking them behind her ear. Give me a chance. Let me show you how happy I could make you. His hand drifted down to her shoulder, her neck. Abruptly, a voice cut through the noise like a shard of glass. Get your hands off my girl. Patrick froze solid. Angela's head snapped up. Raphael stood behind Patrick, with Oscar looming at his shoulder like a mountain. Those ice-blue eyes were fixed on Patrick's hand, still touching Angela's skin, with the kind of cold fury that made men vanish. Patrick turned slowly, his face turning pale. So, this is your real man? He looked back at Angela. The one you said wasn't real. Angela's brain felt like it had short-circuited. The tequila, the shock, Raphael's face. Oh, she breathed. Raphael. Raphael's fist connected with Patrick's jaw before she could finish. Patrick stumbled back, catching himself on the bar. He held up his hands in surrender and backed away, smart enough to recognize when he was hopelessly outmatched. Raphael didn't even watch him go. He was already scooping Angela into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed absolutely nothing. Hey, she squirmed weakly. What are you? Put me down. He carried her right through the crowd, out the door and into the frigid night air. A black SUV idled at the curb. Oscar held the door open. Raphael placed her in the back seat and slid in beside her. The door shut. The world went quiet. Angela's head was spinning. How did you find me? Her words slurred together. Were you following me? Shouldn't you be wrapped up in your blonde girlfriend's arms right now? That faint, infuriating smile curved his lips. Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. Fury pierced through the fog in her brain. She slapped him hard. In the front seat, Oscar's eyebrows shot up. He muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "Here we go." You don't get to do this. Angela's voice shook. You can't just show up and drag me out like you own me. You can't keep kidnapping me whenever you feel like it. Tears burned behind her eyes. I hate you. Raphael didn't flinch. He simply pulled her onto his lap. Why are you here instead of our home, little dove? His voice was low, quiet, and dangerous. And why did you drink so much? Because I hate you, she whispered. But the words came out broken and slurred. The tequila and the exhaustion and the heartbreak crashed over her all at once. Her eyes fluttered closed. She slumped against his chest, unconscious. The SUV pulled away from the curb. Raphael looked down at the woman in his arms. Her breathing had gone soft and even, peaceful. Finally, his fingers combed gently through her hair. You're going to tell me you came back for me, little dove? His voice was barely a whisper. You're not getting away from me that easily. Outside the window, snow drifted through the city lights. And for the first time in 3 months, Raphael Mancini held something worth keeping. Angela woke to the feeling of silk against her skin, disoriented for a moment before recognition slammed into her like a wave. This ceiling, this bed, this scent, cedar and something darker clinging to the pillow beneath her cheek. She knew this room, Raphael's bedroom. Her eyes flew open. The same 4-poster bed, the same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured gardens below. She was back. The events of last night came flooding back in fragments. The club, the tequila, Patrick's hands on her neck. Raphael appearing like an avenging angel and punching Patrick square in the jaw. The car ride home, the slap she'd given him, and then nothing but darkness. She looked down at herself, and her stomach dropped. She was wearing nothing but her underwear. Fury spiked through her chest. That controlling, arrogant. But something else bloomed beneath the anger. Something softer. He found me. He came for me. He brought me here. A smile tugged at her mouth before she could stop it. Maybe he still loves me? She pushed the thought away and found a silk robe in the closet, padding barefoot down the staircase. Maria spotted her first, rushing forward with a tight embrace that smelled like flower and rosemary. Angela, we missed you so much. This house hasn't been the same without you. Angela hugged her back, something loosening in her chest at the familiar warmth. Maria, where are my clothes, my bag, my phone? Mr. Mancini sent your dress to the dry cleaner. Maria's brow furrowed. Your bag? I haven't seen it. Angela's jaw tightened. And where is he? Not here. He left early this morning. Of course. 3 months apart and nothing had changed. Still controlling everything. Still making decisions for her. She turned toward the front door. I'm leaving. Just like this if I have to. Her hand closed around the doorknob. She pulled it open and found Raphael standing on the other side. Ice blue eyes locked onto hers, that infuriating smile playing at his lips. Going somewhere, little dove. You can't keep me prisoner in your house again. The words exploded out of her. Raphael stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and in one fluid motion had her pressed against the wall, not roughly, but firmly. His hands traced up her neck, her shoulders, leaving fire in their wake. After 3 months, his voice was low, his lips hovering inches from hers. These are the first words you say to me? Although, if we're counting what you said last night, I hate you, was particularly memorable. Her breath caught in her throat, heart hammering against her ribs. The front door swung open behind them and Oscar stepped inside, only to freeze mid-stride when he caught sight of them pressed together against the wall. His eyebrows shot up. He spun on his heels so fast he nearly tripped. Didn't see anything, he called over his shoulder. Not a thing. Carry on. As he retreated toward the kitchen, Angela caught him mumbling, Maybe I should pin Maria against a wall like that. If it works for the boss, it might work for me too. Raphael scooped her up and carried her up the stairs before she could react. Put me down. Angela squirmed in his grip. Are you still having me followed? How did you even know I was in the city? She smacked his chest. You narcissist! You actually think I came back for you? He kicked the bedroom door open, dropped her onto the mattress and kissed her, deep and demanding. 3 months of hunger were packed into that single moment. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark. You talk too much, Angela. You didn't used to be like this. That faint smile curved the corner of his lips. You must have been saving up a lot to tell me. His mouth moved to her jaw, her neck, the hollow of her throat. Angela's back arched involuntarily, fingers curling into the sheets. He paused at her hairline, brushing the new bangs aside with gentle fingers. These look good on you. Her lip caught between her teeth. For 3 months, she'd dreamed of this, being back in his arms, his mouth on her skin, but the anger hadn't faded completely. She shoved him back and scrambled off the bed, putting distance between them. I came on vacation with my friend. Not everything has to be about you, Raphael Mancini. He sat up slowly, watching her with heat and something softer. Admiration, maybe. But for me, he said quietly, everything is about you, little dove. Silence stretched between them for a moment before he spoke again. 32:51. So, you're happy in Charleston? Angela put on a casual shrug. Extremely. I'm independent. I've got a great job at a bakery. She let her next words hit him like a punch. I've been going on dates, living the life any woman my age is supposed to. Raphael stood up from the bed, his gaze hardening. Dating. 33:13. He advanced on her, his movements slow and menacing. Angela retreated until her back was flat against the wall. Raphael crowded her, his body pressing into hers. That's right, she breathed. You're a distant memory. I'm seeing other men. He kissed her then, and her soft moan was an instant betrayal. Then why? He murmured, his lips brushing against hers. Are you shaking at my touch? His words made something inside her snap. 33:39. It was the sheer humiliation of him reading her so effortlessly, of coming undone so completely. You arrogant bastard! She slammed both hands into his chest, pushing him back just enough to duck under his arm as he reached for her again. I'm sure you got over me just fine. 3 months without so much as a phone call made it crystal clear how much that proposal meant to you. 33:59. Raphael's infuriating smirk returned. Were you spying on me outside the restaurant last night? Heat flooded her cheeks. The woman you saw was Melissa. I'm an investor in her chain of restaurants. It's strictly professional. He cocked his head. I have zero interest in her. I wasn't asking. That faint smile played at the edge of his mouth, the one that made her want to slap him and kiss him all at once. Liar. 34:24. His hips pressed her more firmly into the wall as his hands slid up her sides, his fingers tangling in her hair as he cupped her face. I missed you every single day, Angela. His thumbs gently caressed her cheekbones. But you have to see it my way. You told me to let you go, and I respected that. I gave you space, hoping that you would choose to come back to me on your own. 34:50. Her mouth opened, but for the first time she was utterly speechless. If I had called, if I'd just shown up, you would have always wondered if you truly wanted this or if you just felt cornered. His forehead rested against hers. So you tell me, why are you here? Is it because you missed me? He kissed her again before she could form a reply, this one deeper, tinged with desperation. 35:15. Tell me you ached for me the way I ached for you. Another kiss followed. Tell me you still crave me as much as I crave you. His hands roamed down her body. His lips traced a path to her neck, her collarbone. No one else even comes close to you, he whispered against her skin. You're the only one I think about, the only one I'll ever want. Angela's thoughts dissolved. Her body had already given in. 35:42. It had been giving in from the second she laid eyes on him outside that club. Tell me you came back for me. His voice was raw, almost broken. Tell me that you're mine. She gave him his answer by wrapping her arms around his neck. In one fluid movement, he lifted her from the wall, her legs instinctively circling his waist as he carried her toward the bed. 36:06. And at last, she gave up the fight. The room filled with their sighs as the dam of 3 months of pent-up desire finally broke. His hands mapped every inch of her as she melted under his touch, his whispered promises, and the profound certainty that she was right where she belonged. 2 hours later, Raphael was buttoning his shirt while Angela was a tangle of limbs and sheets. 36:29. Walking away from you today is going to be the hardest thing I do. He leaned down and kissed her bare shoulder. But I have 2 meetings I can't reschedule. Call your friend. My men are posted outside your hotel to drive her here. Angela sat bolt upright, clutching the sheet to her chest. You never really let me go at all, did you? Raphael kissed her forehead. You've got it wrong. 36:53. I did let you go. I just had you watched from a distance. He shrugged. Those are not the same thing. An hour later, Miranda made her grand entrance. She let out a low whistle, spinning in a slow circle to take in the marble floors and dramatic, sweeping staircase. Holy crap, Angela, this is a palace, an honest-to-God palace. She faced her again, a devilish grin spreading across her face. Mush. 37:21. So, spill. What exactly went down between you two last night? Oscar materialized carrying Miranda's luggage, flashing a smile with all 32 of his teeth. Welcome, Miss Miranda. If you're hungry, Maria can whip something up for you. From the kitchen doorway, Maria shot Oscar a death glare, hissing something venomous in Italian. Angela leaned in and whispered in Oscar's ear. You still haven't told her, have you? 37:43. Look at her. She's seething with jealousy. Oscar's wide grin softened. Actually, I told her everything the night you left for Charleston. We're a thing now. Like an item. Oscar! Maria's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Get in here. Now. He was already shuffling backward toward the kitchen. We're sort of a thing. It's complicated. With that, he vanished around the corner. 38:11. Miranda erupted in laughter. You know, this place is actually fun, Angela. I was picturing some kind of creepy mafia dungeon. But across town, the atmosphere was anything but fun. The private room was smaller than Raphael liked, claustrophobic and intimate, the kind of place where words were spoken that could never be unsaid. Oscar stood behind him, a 6'5" tower of controlled violence, and the Alicey family's bodyguards couldn't stop shooting him nervous looks. 38:38. It was exactly the effect Raphael was going for. Roman Alicey was seated opposite him, his silver hair slicked back from a face with cold eyes and a smile that held no warmth at all. So, the shipping business is off the table, Roman stated casually. Is that your final word, Mancini? You have my answer, Roman. Nightclubs and restaurants. 38:59. That's my world. The ports and the cargo ships. That's not the future I'm building. Roman's smile tightened. Your father would have seen things differently. Raphael's jaw clenched. I am not my father. Roman leaned in. Pivoting your family's empire is a bold play. But walking away from this table without a deal? That's a risky move. 39:20. Raphael pushed his chair back and stood. I know a thing or two about risk. He was almost to the door when Roman's voice stopped him. By the way, he said, his tone soft, almost an afterthought. Do you happen to remember a man named David Fiore? Raphael went completely still, his hand frozen on the doorknob. I always dismissed him as a nobody, an insignificant little man. Roman's voice was laced with feigned innocence. 39:47. But, as it turns out, he had a daughter. The silence in the room was absolute. Angela Fiore. Raphael turned around very slowly. Roman's eyes gleamed with triumph. But you were already aware of that, weren't you? The car door slammed shut. Oscar watched Raphael in the rearview mirror with the caution one uses when approaching a caged tiger. A muscle spasmed under Raphael's left eye, the only outward sign that his iron control was fracturing. 40:16. This is bad, boss, Oscar said, his voice low and steady. He made a direct threat in front of a dozen witnesses. Raphael said nothing, his jaw set so tight it looked like it might crack. He pulled out his phone and dialed Angela's number. It rang once, then twice, then a third time before kicking to voicemail. Answer the phone, little dove. 40:38. Pick up. Her cheerful, recorded greeting filled the car, a stark contrast to the cold dread creeping into his chest. He hit redial, the Manhattan skyline a blur outside the window as the phone rang and rang, only to be met with her voicemail again. Oscar. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet, the kind of calm that comes before a hurricane. I-4101. Roman's first move will be to go after Angela. I want round-the-clock surveillance on her, effective immediately. Oscar acknowledged the order with a nod, but his brow was creased with the one question Raphael didn't want to answer. How does he know about the money, boss? That was supposed to be buried. Raphael let out a slow breath, consciously unclenching his fists. Roman has his fingers in half the underground financial networks on this side of the planet. The Caymans, Panama, Switzerland. 4130. An amount that large leaves a digital footprint, even when it's just sitting there. He stared at his own reflection in the window, which seemed to glare back at him. Those funds haven't been touched in 2 years. Not transferred, not cleaned, not spent a dime. That kind of inactivity raises flags, and those flags led them right to her, the same way they led me to her. 4152. The truth of it struck him like a knife twisting in his gut. I'm the one who brought her here. The words were like poison in his mouth. I put a target on her back the moment I brought her into my world. Cazzo! The Italian curse was a vicious hiss he couldn't hold back. Just then, Oscar's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then his eyes met Raphael's in the mirror. Boss, Angela's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. 4218. 2 of our guys have been on her since she left the mansion. Raphael's hand was already on the door. We're going there. Now. The biting December air nipped at Angela's cheeks as she and Miranda walked down the museum's iconic steps, their arms linked like giddy schoolgirls swapping secrets. Miranda had been chattering nonstop ever since they'd left the Egyptian wing. 4239. Her boundless excitement was contagious, even through the haze of exhaustion Angela felt from last night, or more accurately, this morning. I mean, can you believe it, Angie? Miranda gave her arm a squeeze, her eyes still sparkling with awe. They put a temple inside a building, a whole ancient Egyptian temple, just hanging out in Manhattan like it's no big deal. 4300. Angela let out a laugh, shaking her head. It was a donation from the Egyptian government. A donation? Miranda scoffed, pulling her in closer as they hit the sidewalk. Please. People come to New York to make something of themselves. The Temple of Dender was straight up kidnapped and brought here. A real, genuine laugh bubbled up from deep inside Angela's chest, the first true moment of lightness she'd experienced in months. 4322. The laughter caught in her throat as 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt at the curb in perfect, unnerving synchrony. The doors swung open simultaneously, and 5 men in dark suits stepped out. Their eyes locked onto Angela as they started moving toward her, their strides filled with a chilling, predatory purpose. Miranda's grip on her arm tightened, her playful smile vanishing into a look of alarm. Angie, are those Raphael's men? Why are so many of them swarming us? A cold, heavy dread settled deep in Angela's gut. This couldn't be Raphael's doing. Her own voice sounded far calmer than she felt. He would never create such a public spectacle. Then, 2 more SUVs screeched in behind the first 3, and Angela's heart hammered her ribs until she saw who was getting out. Raphael emerged, with Oscar and 2 of his other men right behind him, and relief washed through Angela like a tidal wave. But something wasn't right. Oscar and the 2 guards moved with purpose toward the other group, their hands resting near their weapons, while Raphael walked straight for Angela with a laser focus that made her forget how to breathe. His face looked like it was chiseled from stone, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with an intensity she'd never seen. It was a dark, worried look, the look of a man who had seen something awful and was desperately trying to outrun it. Raphael, what is going on? The words died on her lips as his hand closed around her arm, firm but not painful, and he started pulling her toward his car before she could even ask. Behind them, Oscar blocked the path of the other crew's leader, a cruel-looking man with dark hair who seemed ready to pull his gun. Oscar's smile was pure intimidation, all teeth. We're always faster, Rocco. You'd do well to remember that. Rocco Alisi's jaw clenched, his face flashing with raw humiliation. Next time will be different, Oscar. Keep telling yourself that. Oscar just winked before backing toward Raphael's SUV, never turning away from the other men. The Alisi crew retreated to their own cars, tires screeching as they peeled away. Rocco immediately pulled out his phone, his knuckles white as he pressed it to his ear. We lost her, brother. Mancini's crew got to her first. In the safety of the car, Angela found herself pressed tightly against Raphael, her hand clutching his forearm like a lifeline in a storm she couldn't comprehend. Miranda sat opposite them, her face pale and stunned, her earlier laughter completely vanished. What the hell was that all about? Angela's voice trembled, no matter how hard she tried to control it. Raphael's face was still a stoic mask as he stared out the window, but his other hand came to rest over hers, its warmth solid and grounding. There are some things we need to discuss when we're home, Angela. His voice was low and controlled, heavy with things he couldn't yet say. His ice blue eyes then shifted to Miranda, and the message was crystal clear. Alone. The study felt claustrophobic, the walls seemingly closing in as Angela faced Raphael, anxiety buzzing under her skin like a trapped insect. He leaned against the desk with his arms crossed, watching her with those piercing eyes that felt like they could see straight into her soul. We have to go to the Cayman Islands. His voice was steady and measured, the tone of a man whose decision was final. The money your father left behind. We need to withdraw it from that account. His words felt like ice water coursing through her veins. So, this is it. The moment I've been dreading all along. Her expression must have given her away because something shifted in his. Maybe it was concern, maybe frustration. Angela bit down on her lip as years of repressed fear clawed their way to the surface. It's always been about the money, hasn't it? The accusation slipped out before she could stop it. Bringing me back here. This entire time, it was all about getting back what my father stole from you. The change in Raphael was immediate and terrifying. His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits, the calm man she knew replaced by someone cold and sharp. Angela reflexively took a step back, her heart pounding as she saw the Mafia boss emerge from behind the mask of her lover. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice quiet and lethal, more frightening than any yell. "If I only wanted the money, Angela, do you honestly believe I couldn't have taken it from you by now? Do you think for a second you could have stopped me?" She flinched as shame burned her cheeks. He pushed himself off the desk and stalked toward her with a predatory grace. This was never about the money. He stopped just inches away, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "This is about protecting you, about keeping you alive." But all Angela could hear was the frantic roar of her own panic, the fear that had taken root the day she found her father's hidden flash drive. Emotion choked her, making it impossible to think straight. She stepped into the space between them, her voice cracking with a vulnerability she couldn't conceal. "Did you ever love me? I have to know. I need to know if any of this was real, or if I was just a pawn to get what you wanted." Something shattered behind his icy gaze. Maybe pain, maybe wounded pride. In a flash, his hands shot out, grabbing her waist and pulling her tight against him, stealing the breath from her lungs. "I have loved you more than I have ever loved anything in this world." The words were raw and ragged, stripped of all his usual composure. "But right now, we can't afford romance. Right now, all that matters is survival." His tone darkened, becoming heavy with unspoken threats. "That money is sitting in an account that has your name on it." His grip on her waist tightened. "And as long as it's there, you are a target. You are a walking bullseye for every enemy I have." Angela's breath grew shallow as the chilling reality of her situation hit her. Those men. At the museum today. Raphael's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching under his skin. "Do you know who that was?" "They answer to Roman Alici, a man who knows exactly what your father took from me. And now he's seen that I won't bend to his will." He released her waist to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "As long as that money is sitting in the Caymans, you are my one weakness. The only leverage my enemies have to destroy me." His voice dropped to a near whisper. And I will never, ever let anyone hurt you. Her own voice trembled, barely audible. Were they going to take me? The silence that hung between them was as sharp as a knife's edge. Yes. The single word was a confession. I got there in time today. Oscar and his men intercepted Rocco before he could get to you. He rested his forehead against hers, and she felt him let out a shaky breath that showed more vulnerability than words ever could. But what if one day I'm not in time? What if I'm too late? He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like the only safe harbor in a gathering storm. His lips found her forehead in a soft, reverent kiss, before capturing her mouth in a way that tasted of both desperation and a solemn vow. When he finally pulled away, Angela's whisper brushed against his lips. If you could have fixed this, if the solution was really this simple, why did you wait until now? Raphael pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, his expression raw and exposed, like a man who had planned for every possibility but this one. Because I would have lost you, he said, his thumb tracing her jawline. If I had forced your hand, or manipulated you into giving up that money, you never would have trusted me again. You would have walked away, and I would have had to let you. He paused, his jaw working. I never anticipated Roman Alice would decide to use you as a pawn against me. That was my mistake. My failure. The vulnerability in his tone made her chest ache. He took a step back, and she watched the mask of the cold, controlled dawn slide back into place. But now there was a new, unshakable fierceness in his eyes. Never again question my love for you, Angela. His voice held absolute conviction. When this is finished, when Roman's leverage is gone, I am putting that ring back on this finger. The one you rejected. A faint smile touched his lips, but his eyes were deadly serious. You are going to be my wife. That is not a request. Angela opened her mouth to argue, but he was already turning for the door. The decision had been made. The conversation was over. But first, the Cayman Islands. He glanced back at her. Tomorrow morning. Packlight. Flying on a commercial plane felt cramped and strange, a world away from the privacy of Raphael's jet. The jet is too easy to track, he'd told her that morning. Roman has people everywhere. To disappear, we fly commercial, use fake names, and pay cash. Angela looked down at the passport in her hand. The face was hers, but the name underneath was not. Monica Gibson. How in the world did you get this? She asked, studying it. I thought this kind of thing only happened in movies. Raphael's lips curved into that familiar half-smile. Oscar took care of it. He also picked the name. He's a big Monica Bellucci fan. Raphael shrugged, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Figures, Angela said with a short laugh. So, my alias was chosen by some guy with a celebrity crush. That's just great. She just shook her head. From now on, I pick the alias. His voice went low. All business. There is no, from now on. The second we move that money, Roman will be on us. These IDs are just a head start, a few days at most. From the window seat, Angela watched him fold himself into the tight space beside her. His long legs were crammed into the economy-class legroom. Oscar wasn't there, shadowing his every step. No line of black SUVs waited on the tarmac. He wore no tailored suit, no gold cufflinks, and none of his usual air of untouchable authority. Instead, a simple white linen shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark jeans made him seem almost ordinary, like a man you might bump into at a coffee shop, not someone with blood on his ledger and enemies around every corner. Georgetown greeted them with the sting of salt air and the blaze of Caribbean sun, a universe away from Manhattan's towers of steel and glass. The hotel was humble by Mancini's usual standards, clean and serviceable, but deliberately forgettable. There was no penthouse, no personal staff, only a basic room where a ceiling fan wobbled and the curtains drifted on the warm, incoming breeze. Angela put down her small bag and turned to see Raphael observing her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "What?" she asked, suddenly feeling exposed. "Nothing." But that slight smile tugged at his lips again. "I'm just watching you get used to this version of me." A laugh escaped her in spite of everything. "It's jarring to see you without the whole production." "We hit the bank in the morning." He drifted to the window, his gaze on the palm-lined street below. "Tonight, we disappear. Just blend in." The restaurant they found was on a wooden deck built over the water, with strings of lights that bobbed in the evening wind as the sun dissolved into the Caribbean. Angela couldn't recall the last time she'd felt so light, so unburdened by the dread and doubt that had defined her life for the past 2 years. The table between them was covered in fresh seafood: grilled mahi-mahi, coconut shrimp, and plantains fried to a perfect golden crisp. The wine was sweet and local, and from somewhere close, a steel drum was playing. She looked over at Raphael, saw how the flickering candlelight softened the hard lines of his face, and felt a warmth blossom inside her chest. "I think I like this you," she confessed, the honesty of it taking her by surprise. "This simpler version, without the bodyguards and the suits and the private jets." She gestured around them. "You almost seem normal." A low, rich chuckle rumbled from Raphael's chest as he poured more wine into her glass. That faint smile graced his lips, the one that still, after everything, made her stomach flip. "I am normal, Angela." He put the bottle down, his eyes meeting hers. "This is the family business. I was born in it. I didn't ask for it, but I've learned how to navigate it my own way." He paused, swirling the wine in his glass. "I try to keep it as legitimate and safe as I can. But the higher you climb, the bigger the target on your back." His hand slid across the table and covered hers, its warmth grounding her. "When your fortune grows, you stop being a person and start being competition. They want your power. They want you on your knees." His thumb drew lazy circles over her knuckles. "It's just human nature. Greed, envy, the thirst for control." He leaned in closer, and his voice dropped to an intimate whisper that cut through the noise of the restaurant. "But at the heart of it all, I'm just a man who wants an ordinary life, a wife, and a family." His ice blue eyes held hers with a searing intensity. "I want that life with you, Angela. All the rest, the empire, the cash, the power. It's all meaningless if you're not by my side." Angela's throat went tight with an unnamed emotion. She turned her head to look at the water, where the lights from distant boats sparkled in the growing darkness. "This place is breathtaking. It's so hard to picture my father ever setting foot here." She hesitated, her brow creased with questions she'd held for so long. How could he just vanish off the face of the earth? How did he pull off stealing that kind of money and disappear so thoroughly that even you couldn't find a trace? Raphael's face grew pensive as he let go of her hand and leaned back. "In our world, disappearing is a skill if you have the right connections and plan with precision." He took a drink of wine. "Your father spent 20 years on the financial side of our business. He managed the money for some of the most powerful outfits on the East Coast. That gave him contacts, leverage, and the kind of knowledge very few ever see." He put down his glass, his gaze far away. "Being the keeper of the accounts is the most dangerous and powerful position you can have. Everybody needs you. Everybody tells you their secrets." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "And if you're clever enough, and if you're patient, you can use that position to build yourself an escape hatch that nobody ever knows exists." Angela's chest was a knot of conflicting feelings. Sorrow for the father she lost, fury at the man who'd put her in this mess, and the impossible task of reconciling the two. So he knew the way out. she murmured. He planned his exit for years, and when the time was right. Her voice faded as she stared at her untouched drink. He tried to settle his debt to me by taking from you, as if that would make things square. When she looked up, a strange expression was in Raphael's eyes, something that almost looked like respect. He nodded slowly, his stare locked on her face with a focus that made her skin prickle. I love you, Angela. The words were stark and direct, without any pretense. And there is nothing I would not do to keep you safe. Nothing. The steel drums kept playing as the Caribbean night settled around them like a solemn promise. And in that one perfect moment, the crushing weight of everything they ran from in New York seemed to dissolve in the warm, salty air. Tomorrow meant facing the bank and the consequences of her father's actions. But tonight, they were just two people eating by the ocean, pretending the rest of the world had ceased to exist. The bank was hidden behind a featureless door on a quiet street. No nameplate, no logo, nothing to advertise the fortunes within. Angela's fingers were laced with Raphael's as they walked toward the private banking counter, and she found herself squeezing his hand, her own palm slick with sweat, her stomach twisted with anticipation. This is it, she thought. The moment I've been dreading for 2 years. A man in a sharp gray suit, probably in his mid-40s, rose to meet them with a practiced professional smile. Mr. and Mrs. Mancini, Raphael said, his voice perfectly smooth. We have a meeting concerning the Fiore account. The banker's eyebrows shot up a fraction of an inch before he gestured to a private office. Of course, right this way. Once inside the glass-walled room, Angela laid out her identification, passport, birth certificate, all the papers Raphael had helped her put together before they flew out. The banker went over each document with painstaking care, comparing signatures, checking photos, and confirming every single detail. At last, he turned to his monitor, typed in a sequence of codes, and then became completely still. When he looked up again, his polite demeanor had been replaced by something that looked like awe. Miss Angela Fiore. His voice became a discreet murmur. The current balance of your account is 10 million United States dollars. He steepled his fingers on the desk, his eyes flickering between her and Raphael. What is your intention for these funds? Angela opened her mouth to speak, but Raphael cut in first, his voice steady and assured. 4 million will be wired to Teach for America. He took a folded document from his jacket and slid it smoothly across the desk. Here are the account and routing details. Angela's head snapped in his direction, her mind reeling with confusion. Raphael didn't even look at her. His focus remained on the banker. Another 4 million is to be sent to Habitat for Humanity. The documentation is identical. What is he doing? Then, as the realization dawned on her, a slow smile began to form on Angela's lips. A warmth bloomed in her chest, like the sun breaking through a storm. The remaining 2 million, Raphael stated, finally turning to look her in the eye, will be deposited into the Fiore Education Foundation account. He passed over a third document. Here is the account information. The banker examined the documents, then looked at Angela, his professional detachment barely concealing his immense curiosity. Ma'am, do you authorize these transactions? Angela didn't reply right away. Instead, she turned to Raphael, cradled his face in her hands, and gave him a soft, deep kiss that said everything words couldn't. When she pulled away, his piercing blue eyes were warm in a way she had rarely ever seen. That faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. She turned back to the banker, her voice clear and strong. I authorize them with everything I have. The Georgetown sun was a brilliant blaze above them as they walked out of the bank, the immense weight of $10 million and 2 years of constant fear finally lifted from Angela's soul. On the other side of the road, a Christmas tree decked out in silver tinsel stood beneath the palms, its ornaments looking absurdly out of place in the tropical climate. A little ways down, someone had constructed a snowman from sand and given it a Santa hat and sunglasses. Angela laughed at the sight, shaking her head. Christmas in the Caribbean. Her reality had completely unraveled. They'd only gone maybe half a block, their hands laced together, when she suddenly dug in her heels, pulling Raphael to a stop. He pivoted, arching an eyebrow. "What's wrong? What's with that look?" A frantic pulse hammered in Angela's chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something else. A wild, chaotic blend of elation and sheer astonishment. "Did you seriously just give away $10 million to a charity, Raphael?" The question was sharp, almost an accusation whispered on a shaky breath. "Why didn't you say anything? Not on the plane, not over dinner, not a single word." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth as he closed the space between them, forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. His thumb brushed against her bottom lip, outlining its shape with a slow, deliberate touch that stole her breath. "Did you honestly believe I'd let that get in our way?" His voice was a low murmur, a private sound just for her. "That $10 million means more to me than you do?" He sealed the words with a tender kiss. It wasn't a demand, but a vow. When he drew away, her head was still reeling, but a single question cut through the haze. "Raphael, what is the Fiore Education Foundation?" A full smile spread across his face. He started moving again, his playful tug on her hand urging her forward. "It's your scholarship fund," he tossed back at her, "to help young people who can't afford their tuition." The words made Angela falter, nearly stumbling as she rushed to match his long legs. "You started a foundation? With my name on it?" "I did." He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, his pace unbroken. "It's all yours, Angela. You choose the recipients. You control the funds. Every last detail." He shot a look over his shoulder, a hint of playful mischief dancing in his ice-blue eyes. "Think of it as an early wedding present." Angela's jaw went slack. She couldn't form a single word. A wedding present. The phrase was still echoing in her mind when Raphael hailed a cab for their hotel. The trip back to New York was transformed. It was lighter, as if the very air inside the plane had been purified. For most of the flight, Angela slept soundly against Raphael's shoulder, overcome with a pleasant sort of exhaustion. When their jet landed at JFK, she had the distinct feeling she wasn't just returning home, but stepping into an entirely new existence. As their car passed through the wrought iron gates, the setting sun was bleeding across the horizon in strokes of crimson and gold. The transformation was instant and breathtaking. The estate was straight out of a storybook, a winter wonderland. A massive Christmas tree dominated the front lawn, its branches glittering with countless white lights that shimmered in the twilight. The mansion itself was swathed in white blossoms, cascades of roses, lilies, and orchids spilled from every window ledge and surrounded every entrance, while golden lights outlined the roof and twisted around the railings. "Raphael!" Her voice faded as she absorbed the scene, her brain failing to piece it all together. Near the main doors, Oscar was in the middle of a tense discussion with a florist who looked petrified. The bodyguard's hulking figure dwarfed the other man as he pointed an accusing finger into a pail of white roses. "These are past their prime," Oscar's voice boomed across the drive, dripping with threat. "Look at this. They're already drooping." He pinched a petal between his fingers, holding it up like evidence. "This won't do for today." He rested a hand on his hip, his jacket shifting just enough to expose the weapon holstered there. All the color drained from the florist's face. "Right, of course, sir. We'll get fresh ones right now. Instantly. It's no trouble." Raphael came up behind them, setting a placating hand on Oscar's shoulder. "Oscar, leave the man alone." The bodyguard turned, his menacing glare melting into a look of slight embarrassment. "Boss, these roses were subpar. I heard." Raphael's reply was dry, yet held a note of fondness. "I'm positive they'll be flawless now." Angela remained motionless on the drive, her eyes taking in the decorated house, the endless flowers, and the whirlwind of activity all around. "Can somebody explain what is happening?" Raphael took her hand, guiding her through the front doors. They passed the main staircase, now draped in white ribbons and lit by candles, and moved by Maria, who was setting up floral arrangements, her eyes already shining with emotion. He led her all the way to the master suite without a word. There, arranged perfectly on the bed, was a wedding gown. It was crafted from a simple, elegant white silk that seemed to shimmer in the dying light. Angela gasped, her hand covering her mouth as her knees went weak. "Raphael?" He came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders and leaning in, his lips grazing her ear. "I will give you the wedding you've always imagined, Angela. The perfect dress, the ideal location, every guest you want, all of it." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "But I need you to marry me now. Today." She twisted in his embrace, her eyes pleading for an answer. "The Elisis," he went on, his face becoming grim. "While you are still Angela Fiore, you are exposed. You are leverage they can use to get to me." His jaw clenched. "But the second you are Angela Mancini, the second you are my wife, hurting you is a declaration of war." He cupped her face, his thumbs caressing her cheeks with a surprising gentleness. "Roman understands the stakes. He knows that an attack on my wife would bring every family loyal to me down on his head. The price would be too high." He pressed his forehead to hers. "This wedding, right now, it's the quickest path to ensuring your safety, to making it so no one can touch you." Angela's breathing grew short and rapid as she tried to absorb it all. "But I swear to you," Raphael whispered, "in a couple of months, once this danger is gone, we will have a proper ceremony. The one you are owed. You'll pick the gown, organize everything, and have everyone you care about there." That small smile returned, taking the hard edge off his expression. "And I will get on my knee in front of all of them and ask you to marry me all over again." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small velvet box. Lying on the black silk inside was the ring she had refused months earlier. The very same brilliant diamond that once symbolized all her anxieties now sparkled with a different kind of promise. As he slipped it onto her finger, she let him. Angela gazed down at the ring, a battle of emotions raging within her. It was a mix of love and frustration, thankfulness and a feeling that was disturbingly close to resentment. "I know you love me, Raphael." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I finally believe you, but..." She locked her eyes with his, making herself meet his stare. "I need more than that. I need some proof that I have a real place in the world you want me to join." Her fingers fiddled with the ring, conscious of its weight on her hand. "This isn't about a lavish ceremony or an expensive dress. I need a sign that my safety with you is real, that this won't just be a beautiful prison." She shook her head, fighting to find the right words. "I can't even say what it is, but I need something tangible from you, Raphael. Something that belongs only to me." His hands clamped onto her waist, yanking her hard against him with a sudden fierceness. "I know just the thing, my dove." She had no time to reply before his lips crashed down on hers, a hungry, possessive kiss that wiped away her breath and every coherent thought. By the time they separated, Angela was shaking, her lips tender, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Raphael, that's not an answer." She placed her hands on his chest, pushing for distance. "You don't get to kiss your way out of this." "I know, my dove." His voice was a deep, private rumble, and the fire in his eyes was enough to make her legs give out. He lowered his head, his lips just brushing her ear as he murmured something that sent her entire world spinning. Angela's mouth fell open, her eyes widening in disbelief as his words sank in. "You can't be serious." She leaned back to study his face, desperately scanning for any hint that he was lying. "Is that the truth?" I am more sure of this than anything else in my entire life, Angela. Pure joy erupted inside her, a brilliant, dazzling explosion she couldn't hold back. She wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing him into a kiss filled with the salt of tears, the sweetness of laughter, and the promise of a new chapter. I love you, Raphael Mancini. He gripped her tightly, burying his face in her hair, and they stayed that way for a long, silent moment. Their intimate ceremony was held in the estate's winter garden, just as dusk began to fall on the snowy landscape. The glass conservatory was overflowing with white roses, lilies, and orchids, their scent mingling with the heat from a large stone hearth at the other end of the space. Outside the frosted glass, snowflakes meandered down from the evening sky, while inside, the soft flicker of candles and the crackle of the fire bathed everything in a warm, golden glow. Maria gently placed a bouquet of white roses into Angela's shaky hands, her own eyes shimmering with emotion. "This is for your hair," she murmured, carefully sliding an ornate vintage comb into place. "This was my mother's. He insisted you have it." A knot formed in Angela's throat. This came from Raphael's mother, the woman taken too soon, whose tragic loss had forged the man he became. On unsteady legs, she approached Raphael, the simple silk gown he had picked for her flowing around her, while his mother's comb in her hair captured the flickering candlelight with each step she took. Oscar and Miranda served as their witnesses. Oscar stood with Raphael, and Miranda was at Angela's side. The moment the ceremony commenced, Oscar's eyes welled up, the moisture building until it traced paths down his scarred cheeks. Maria reached out, caressing his face with gentle fingers, before linking her arm in his, keeping him steady. Miranda held her bouquet of white roses, her smile stretched so broadly it must have made her cheeks ache. "Do you, Angela Fiore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Angela gazed at Raphael, the man who had once filled her with terror, who had become her protector, and who loved her in ways she was only beginning to grasp. "I do." "And do you, Raphael Mancini, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" That subtle smile played on his lips. "I do." Raphael's kiss was slow and profound, sealing their vows with a tenderness that made her eyes burn. When they finally separated, Oscar was weeping without restraint as Maria comforted him, and Miranda dabbed at her own tears. Angela Mancini. She faced her husband, a smile spreading across her face. Whatever the future held, they would confront it as one. The next morning, inside a penthouse on the other side of the city, Roman Alesi glared at the report before him, while Rocco waited by the window. "The money has vanished." Roman's voice was deceptively calm. $10 million, donated to charity. He looked up, raw disbelief flashing in his eyes. "Every single cent." Rocco shifted his posture. "And the girl?" Angela Fiore is now Angela Mancini." Roman's jaw clenched. "They were married last night." His fist crashed down on the desk, making the nearby decanter jump. How in the hell did he pull that off so quickly? The question was a low snarl. "We had her under surveillance. We had a strategy." Rocco took a step closer. "So, we take her. We wait for a moment when she's vulnerable. Use her for leverage." Roman's head shot up, his gaze cold enough to drop the temperature in the room. "Think, Rocco." Each word was a sharp blow. "That money is gone, and if we lay a hand on Mancini's wife, his wife, we'll have every family in New York on our backs." He shook his head. "No one lets that kind of thing go, not even for an outfit like ours." Rocco's fists tightened by his sides. "So that's it? We just accept his victory?" "We bide our time," Roman said, leaning back, his expression hardening into something patient yet lethal. "We find a different pressure point." His fingers tapped a rhythm on the desk. "Mancini believes he's untouchable right now, but every single man has a vulnerability." A chilling smile stretched across his face. I will find his, and when I do, he is going to pay. 4 months later, the lavish wedding was held on a warm May evening in Manhattan. With 500 guests and white orchids pouring from every surface, Angela wore a custom Vera Wang gown that made Raphael's breath hitch the moment she started down the aisle. Angela soon commanded the pastry kitchen at Raphael's premier restaurant, where her cacio e pepe became legendary with the clientele. She had finally discovered her purpose, her partner, and a chance to build something genuine. And Raphael honored his vow. He began to systematically sell his restaurants and nightclubs, dissolving partnerships and retreating from the dark world he once ruled. The change was gradual, cautious, and methodical, but it was undoubtedly happening. It was a new beginning, a clean slate they would share. Some tales conclude with a kiss, and others with a wedding band. This one concluded with laughter, the kind that drifted on the tropical breeze, blending with the sound of waves on Caribbean sands, and a child's gleeful scream from the garden. The house was perched on a hill with a view of the turquoise sea of St. Lucia, its white exterior adorned with bougainvillea, and a porch that wrapped around it to catch the morning air. By Mancini's old standards, it was humble. There were no iron gates, no surveillance systems, no guards in black suits making their rounds. It was simply a home. Their home. Down in the garden, Raphael Mancini, the former underworld king of New York, was on his hands and knees, pushing a bright red ball across the grass to a dark-haired toddler whose laughter pealed like tiny bells. "Damien, get it, son!" The boy, 2 years old, who had his father's piercing blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, lunged for the ball, grabbing it with his pudgy hands before promptly shoving it into his mouth. Maria came up the garden path, stopping to gently brush Damien's dark hair and give Raphael a wave before heading up the porch stairs. She knocked on the front door, one of her hands resting on the distinct curve of her pregnant belly. Angela threw the door open, already in mid-motion, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Maria, get in here. Get in here." She guided her inside, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. "I left Damien's milk in the fridge, and the formula is on the counter." The words spilled out of her as she snatched her purse from its hook. "My day at work is going to be insane. I've got 10 custom cakes to finish before the dinner rush." Angela's gaze softened as she looked at Maria's belly. 7 months along, she was radiant with the unique glow of expecting a child. A mischievous smile formed on Maria's lips. "You mean 11? This little one has a fierce craving for your pastries, and I'm not about to endure it by myself." A wave of warmth spread through Angela's chest, and a light, easy laugh escaped her. 11 it is, then." The back door creaked open and Raphael came in. Damien was propped on his hip, still chewing happily on the red ball. He passed the boy to Maria's open arms and left a kiss on his son's head. "Oscar's here," he said, before moving to Angela and drawing her in. His lips met hers, gently at first, then with more passion, tasting of coffee and the mango from their breakfast. As he drew away, his thumb traced the line of her jaw with a familiar gentleness. "Let us give you a ride to the pastry shop, my love." Angela's fingers clutched the fabric of his linen shirt as she kissed him once more, taking her time, savoring his warmth against her. "I think I'll take my bike, sweetheart," she whispered against his lips. "The ride helps me clear my head before things get hectic." A familiar darkness entered Raphael's eyes, a look that still made her heart race after all this time. He gave her one last kiss on the forehead before turning to leave. "Raphael," she called out as he headed for Oscar's waiting jeep, "what time are you closing up the restaurant tonight?" He stopped on the garden path and looked back with that trademark smile, the one that used to make powerful men shake and now made her feel like a teenager with a crush. "Whatever time you say, little dove." Oscar was propped against a worn-out blue Wrangler. It had sand on the floor and a fishing rod tied to the roof, a universe away from the armored SUVs of their past. "Morning, boss." Oscar greeted as Raphael got into the passenger seat. Raphael let out a sigh and raked a hand through his hair. Oscar, you need to stop calling me boss. We've been over this. I don't want Angela to be reminded of how things used to be. Oscar gave a solemn nod as he steered out of the driveway and onto the winding road along the coast. Right, boss. Got it. Let Angela believe we're just a regular, unassuming family. His large hands were tight on the steering wheel as they drove by a fruit stand, where an old woman waved to them as if they were old acquaintances. Meanwhile, we've got millions of dollars stashed in the bank, and we're on our way to haggle over fish prices with the locals to get the best selection for our restaurant, so we can serve our patrons tonight. He shook his head slowly, a tone of disbelief mixed with complaint in his voice. There hasn't been a single brawl since we got here. Not a one. This peaceful life is getting a little tedious, isn't it? His shoulders slumped. I don't feel like I have any authority anymore, boss. None at all. Raphael remained silent for a beat. The Jeep rounded a turn, and he saw their house on the hill through the palm trees, its white walls aglow in the morning sun, with the garden where he'd just been with his son. Angela's laughter floated down to them on the salty air, sounding bright and unburdened as she said her goodbyes to Maria on the porch. That subtle signature smile touched Raphael's lips as he watched her. Everyone used to be afraid of me, he said softly, his eyes still locked on the woman in the garden. Men would cross to the other side of the street to avoid me. Deals were made and broken based on my word alone. I wielded more power than most people could ever dream of. He finally turned to Oscar, and his ice-blue eyes held a look of settled conviction, of absolute peace. Now, one person calls me Papa, he said, his voice softening, and another calls me husband. There's no power on this earth that can measure up to that. Oscar didn't speak for a long moment. Then, he cleared his throat. Boss, there's something I need to tell you. He kept his eyes on the road, his scarred expression uncharacteristically grave. Maria made me swear. When the baby arrives, she expects me to handle the night feedings. Raphael arched an eyebrow. And she warned me, if I grumble even once, she's going to tell her mother. Oscar's voice sank to a tone of sheer terror. Her mother, boss. The woman who, after 3 years, still refers to me as the big one who eats all the food. Raphael let out a genuine laugh, the kind that was a rarity in his former life, but now came so freely. Welcome to the married life, Oscar. I used to make men disappear. Oscar slowly shook his head, a hesitant smile beginning to form on his lips. And now I find myself unnerved by a 5'2" Italian grandmother. The Jeep rolled along the coastal highway, carrying 2 men who once commanded through terror, now headed for a future dictated by fish market prices, dinner plans, and the quiet, everyday miracles of love. Because they had learned that true strength wasn't about having nothing left to fear. It was about having a life worth fighting for. And that sometimes, relinquishing control is the most powerful move a man can make. This is where we part ways with Angela and Raphael, not at an ending, but at a brand new beginning. Thank you for being so patient for part 2, and for following this story all the way to its conclusion. I sincerely hope it delivered the payoff you were waiting for. I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Just drop a yes in the comments if you were satisfied with the ending, or a no if you weren't. Be brutally honest, I can take it. And hey, believe in love, will you? The real kind, the chaotic, challenging, and terrifying version that upends everything. I'm already looking forward to our next story together. Oh, and speaking of which, I have a small surprise for you all. Remember Bambi, Lily, and Nico? Part 2 of their story is dropping next week. Trust me on this, you are not going to want to miss it. Now, go ahead and hit that like button if you haven't done so already, and I will see you in the next one. Angela and Raphael's journey reminds us that real love is never about power, money, or control. It's about the freedom to choose and the trust earned through actions. When it comes to love, sometimes letting go isn't a loss, but the only way to find out if the other person will come back for the right reasons. Their story also reveals that the greatest human strength isn't the ability to make others afraid, but the courage to give up that power to protect what you hold dear. Love only becomes a true sanctuary, rather than a gilded cage, when you place the safety, dignity, and happiness of your partner above your own ego and personal gain. Ultimately, the most enduring happiness isn't found in having it all, but in knowing what's truly worth keeping to live a life with meaning.